Welcome, age of vintage society. Peter O'Toole isn't a fantastic actor, but he didn't know how to keep his tool in his pants. He brandished his sword at every opportunity he got, and it glistened with juices that kept it strong for decades. How Peter O'Toole and Ava Gardner had love-making marathons. I want you to know, my viewers, how much I appreciate your generous support on Patreon and your activity on the channel. These videos would not have been possible without you. Big thanks to those who watched the video until the end. Peter O'Toole and his wandering tool. You make a star, you make a monster. When Sam Spiegel, the producer of the hit film Lawrence of Arabia, said this, he was right. O'Toole became even more of what he was. Of course, long before riches, O'Toole was every bit of the Hellraiser, with a couple of naughty highlights before wealth came. One of the highlights of his mischief would be the teenage loss of his virginity to a busty Spaniard, Bubble LaRue, who worked as a stripper in Leeds, Peter's home city. Busty Bubble was originally a barmaid and a professional lady of the night, if you catch our drift. She came to England and settled at Leeds at the behest of her husband. Her husband died, and the young O'Toole was one of her candidates for keeping her woman parts moist and her bust energetically fondled. Safe to say, O'Toole took kindly to being used as a pleasure tool, and did so for 5 months. He said about his regular visits to the busty Bubble, "She taught me every sexual trick I've known in my life." Perhaps the visits would have been longer if Bubble hadn't suggested a rendezvous to him with one of her paying customers. Bubble's demand came a few years sooner, as it would turn out a threesome was right up his alley when he grew older, and it was with a popular actress whose name rhymes with Ava Gardner. We spilled the beans already, but there are far more beans in the sack than his threesome with Ava Gardner, which involved his best bud, Richard Burton. Ava Gardner had originally met Peter through an introduction by film director John Huston in 1960. Ava had heard of the legend of Peter and decided she wanted in on some of his actions, so she seduced O'Toole, which wouldn't have been something that must have been difficult to do. After all, Peter is always ready for action. The two had a tryst that lasted for 3 nights, after which Peter made a solemn declaration. He said, "I have nothing but praise for the woman. She told me I was 10 times the lover that Gable was, but not quite the equal of Robert Mitchum." Interesting that O'Toole's years of experience didn't make him the best there was, but he would have had more opportunities to make even more of an impression 4 years after. However, it wasn't only him that had grown in lust. 4 years later, while Ava was filming Night of the Iguana in 1964, the two had a reunion, and the desire was apparent, but Peter O'Toole wouldn't be enough. O'Toole needed help to satiate Ava's fire, which would have consumed Peter. He called on his best drinking buddy, Burton. They began the night by drinking, an activity Peter had significant expertise with. They went to their cabin, and Ava announced the 2 men. "There's a fire raging inside me," Ava revealed, "and I think that it will take 2 stout-hearted men, a Welshman and an Irishman, to extinguish the flame," she continued. The 2 firemen were just enough for the job, but it seems they barely did it. The magnificent Peter said, "She was right. It took the both of us to satisfy her that night." However, even though Peter is willing to share his naughty time with Ava with his friend Burton, he isn't exactly a good friend of Burton, which almost costs him his relationship with him. It all started with the ravishing Elizabeth Taylor. Peter was a magnificent actor with a dramatic flair that few can match. His apparent talent, handsome features, and piercing blue eyes easily fetched him roles and helped him out in women's pants. Like Gardner, Elizabeth found Peter to be an interesting person, and she took a liking to him. Elizabeth wanted the star to star in her upcoming film. So she invited him to her hotel suite in the Dorchester Hotel to determine if they had on-screen chemistry. Well, what happens between the two wasn't chemistry. It was closer to biology. It didn't matter to Elizabeth or Peter that they were both married. Elizabeth was married to Eddie Fisher, while Peter was to Sian Phillips. Well, the role wouldn't go to Peter, but to his friend Richard Burton, who became Mark Antony in the film Cleopatra in 1963. But that wasn't the only thing that went to Richard. Elizabeth also married Richard Burton, but this didn't stop the sexual relationship between her and O'Toole. It continued until 1972 and ended with delirious love-making while filming Under Milk Wood. While they banged, the film also banged with negative reviews from the critics. Interesting how during their first meeting Peter was nervous. A prolific man such as himself was getting overwhelmed about having sex with Taylor. He must have done well, because Taylor wouldn't have cheated on 2 husbands if it wasn't worth it. In 1967 the 2 stars had too much to drink. To be fair, they always had too much to drink. During the drinking an argument arose between the 2 of them. The 2 drunk men believed they were each the better actor. He revealed a dastardly secret out of spite, or the usual hell-raising attitude O'Toole had. He wanted to get one over on his friend, and he screamed, "I've been boffing your wife for years, and she tells me I'm much better in the sack." The yacht they were having fun in Sardinia during the making of their film Boom, grew silent as a graveyard. The silence heralded the death of their friendship, at least temporarily. What happened next was even sadder. Burton left the yacht in a fury and ceased brawling with Peter. It was as if he suspected what was going on, for he didn't confront his wife about it. Some say that the master of dramatics Peter had once snuck Elizabeth undressed and kept her under a blanket. It was all in a bid to let Burton know Peter was bedding such a magnificent woman. So yes, perhaps it was because of this that Burton didn't contest Peter's statement. He disappeared, and his absence stopped the making of Boom. However, he didn't become sad, but he went on to have his revenge. He had lots of revenge while O'Toole stayed with Elizabeth, not minding his buddy had disappeared. They made up, but their friendship died the time his romps with Elizabeth died in 1972. Elizabeth, despite having sexual relationship with Peter, got angry at him due to how he embarrassed himself with Burton. They too drank to the extent that they slept on the floor of the pub they were in, serenading themselves with the birthday song for hours. Elizabeth doesn't approve of our racing around together, so for years he didn't see his friend and began to refer to his long-time partner as that woman. However, he wouldn't. He still had 2 friends left he could play with, alcohol and women. O'Toole was born in August 1932 in Leeds, Yorkshire, England, to an Irish father, which is one of the reasons he has a great attachment to Ireland. He would tell people he was born in Connemara, County Galway, Ireland. He even wore green socks all the time. The image his father cut amazed his son. He was the sort of manly man, a young boy, that could inspire an upbringing like that of Peter. He was always seen with a cigarette sitting between his lips and a Guinness pint in his hands. His father, nicknamed Captain, was a bookmaker and a Catholic, which is an interesting combination considering Catholicism and gambling don't mix. Also at the time, bets on horse racing were illegal. However, this didn't stop Captain from taking it as a career, and this impacted Peter, who understood that his father's job was a risk, and it would also make him take similar risks in his own life. Due to the nature of his work, Peter's dad would have them move around a lot, from one racehorse town to another. As long as there were gamblers in each town, then there was income for a captain to make, but as gambling was illegal, they had to evade authorities constantly. So O'Toole didn't have that familial stability while growing up, and it would tell in his life too, with the many on and off relationships he had with women. Some measure of stability did come as his parents shipped him off to a Catholic school to keep him safe from the marauding Hitler. However, it was just that O'Toole traded one fear for another. Hitler was replaced with flapping nuns with white withered hands. Elaborating his fear, he said, "I used to be scared stiff of the nuns. Their whole denial of womanhood, the black dresses and the shaving of the hair, were so horrible, so terrifying." He wasn't the best student, but he was inspired to become a priest due to his teacher, but he discovered some awful things that made him change his mind. It is that mind-changing that reportedly gave us the man who bedded Princess Margaret, late Queen Elizabeth's more outgoing sister. The royal family member was having problems in her marriage to Lord Snowdon. The two allegedly met at one of his 1963 performances, Lord Jim. It would seem that his performances won the princess over for more performances. Some say the evidence of their affairs lies in that O'Toole was noticed driving the princess's old model Rolls-Royce Phantom. Their dalliances had just begun. It went on for 8 years, and it took them to historical places like the private villa in Marrakesh, Morocco, where Franklin D. Roosevelt and Winston Churchill met during the January 1943 Casablanca Conference. It seemed the pleasure at this room was significantly much better as she brought him there a second time. Also, they went to exotic places like Mustique, one of the Caribbean islands, and the Princess's Hideaway from the world. One of the high notes of their romps would be where they took their romance into a giant bathtub, with scented flowers floating about the tub. Well, that didn't stop him from whoring around, and he found himself between the legs of a transgender woman. This happened on the set of Lawrence of Arabia, the film which broke out the star as a box-office star, and also significantly improved his life. The film took 2 years to make, which required the actor's constant monitoring. Well, his drinking is slightly reduced, but not his cavorting with women. Even the reduction of his drinking didn't mean he was mostly sober. What happened was, he was mostly not sleeping on the floor drunk. When he caught a break, he and Omar Sharif, his co-star, blew almost a year's salary partying hard. Omar had flown them to Beirut on a private jet for their wholesome experience. The film Lawrence of Arabia broke out the star, but didn't break him of the habit. Despite constant monitoring, Peter O'Toole still had his misadventures, and it wasn't partying all the time. One of his misadventures was when he was looking for a brothel. He and his buddy Omar walked into a house full of women. However, the women there wouldn't even look at them once. They had found themselves in a nunnery, making rich fools of themselves. So when the film was winding to an end and filming shifted to Spain, there was a huge party, and at the party O'Toole drank and continued to drink. He met April Ashley, a fashion icon and model. He was quick to her pants, and in the throes of orgasm she whispered to Peter, "I was born a boy." O'Toole didn't care. Well, O'Toole wasn't the least bit discouraged by the encounter. He would have even more weird adventures. Like the time in 1963, he and Vivian Leigh hooked up after the woman's husband, Laurence Olivier, left her for a younger woman in one of the largest celebrity scandals of the time. The two had dinner in one of London's finest restaurants, then they had each other in the night, spending intimate moments together in what seemed like a shrine to her ex-husband. There were about 9 pictures of Olivia in the room, but Peter kept on meticulously ploughing her field so that their relationship would continue on and off. Death did them apart, as Vivian was lost to tuberculosis in 1967. Thank God for his life, as tuberculosis was highly infectious, but Peter was used to taking risks, and there was the one he took in Italy when he was filming The Bible. The man hooked up with Barbara Steele, his co-star, who had a large following in Italy. A photographer blinded the actress, leading to a fight, leading to O'Toole's arrest. Still, the man was able to devise a means to escape Italy, and he did it in style. You would expect 1 or 2 sad romances in all of his dalliances, as prolific as he was. The saddest would be with Audrey Hepburn, who he got together before they filmed How to Steal a Million, a romantic comedy released in 1965. Their passion was steaming and the romance hot. Audrey was married, and her excuse for getting together with Peter was, "I believe that an actress has to be at least a little bit in love with her leading man, and vice versa." It was fun until pregnancy, but Audrey wasn't sure who had it between Peter and her husband. After she told Peter about the pregnancy, she miscarried. Their relationship crumbled, leaving Peter devastated, as he wanted their relationship to continue. Peter O'Toole was married for a larger part of his time. He slept around and also drank for most of those parts. He would lose his wife, Sian Phillips, after Peter's infidelities and drinking got too much for her to bear. However, she didn't leave until she cheated back. Interestingly, Peter felt she betrayed him, despite having different affairs of his own. To cap it, his wife married the man she cheated on Peter with, a man 20 years younger than her. That wouldn't be Peter's only loss. His drinking became so terrible that he ruined his internal organs. Half of his stomach was gone, so he became diabetic. He found an alternative to alcohol in weed, and even though he had become gaunt and lost his dashing looks, he was still able to get with women. He slept with 1,033 women. His conquests allegedly involve Jane Mansfield, Anita Ekberg, and Diana Dawes, which helped fetch him $150. Despite his health problems, the man lived into his 80s. His friends had met their demise years prior. He racked up multiple Oscar nominations throughout his career with his melodramatic acting style, but not once did he win. However, before his death he won an honorary Oscar, which he begrudgingly collected. Hollywood sure has racked up many super-talented actors, and Peter would be one of its top men. These Hollywood stars knew how to live wild and enjoy life. Why was Elizabeth Taylor and Richard Burton's affair condemned even by the Pope? Watch this video.